Thanks, Gene. Joining me with more on the intelligence failures, the president's response, and more than that is Julian Zelizer. He's a Princeton University professor. He's also the author of the compelling new book. It's called Arsenal of Democracy, the Politics of National Security from World War II to the World on Terror. Ed Rollins is a Republican strategist, former White House political director, and CNN contributor. And Robert Zimmerman, Democratic strategist and CNN contributor. All of y'all are getting some seriously long titles. We're going to have to work on shortening all that in the future. Here's what the president said last night. He said, and he said it a few times before, the buck stops with me. Listen.
I am less interested in passing out blame than I am in learning from and correcting these mistakes to make us safer. For ultimately, the buck stops with me.
He talks about learning from mistakes, and this information is absolutely shocking. And to hear that the buck stops with him, he said that about the AIG bonuses. He said that about the economy. The buck stops with him. When you hear that, what exactly does that mean, Ed Rollins?
Well, the whole thing yesterday was a little scary to me, and I'm always about national security. We're all Americans, not Republicans or Democrats. 9/11 occurred, our guard was down. We've spent 8 years trying to build a defense mechanism all over the world to make sure this doesn't happen again. We have been hit in many places. We lost 2 weeks ago our CIA principal people in Afghanistan. We had people get into the White House past the Secret Service. We had a guy who literally almost blew up a plane and would have if he hadn't been totally inept. And everybody who stood up yesterday said everything is wrong. There was not one agency that stood up and said we did everything right. It was every agency was a failure. And I walked away from watching that press conference yesterday, not just the president, but everybody else saying, if I was a terrorist sitting out there, I'd say, man, now's the time to go. This team doesn't know what they're doing, and I think that was frightening to me.
The level of mistakes was very surprising, was shocking, I thought.
Absolutely. Also, I would also say if a terrorist was watching this broadcast, they also might wake up to the reality that the United States is going to revamp their program and approach with much greater resolve and much greater determination. I thought the president's resolve was important and critical in terms of his presentation yesterday. And there's no question the mistakes that were made were stunning and absolutely shocking to see 8 years later. What concerns me and where I differ with many Democrats is that it's not about assessing blame, it's about holding people accountable. And there are individuals who didn't execute properly or train properly, and they have to be removed.
And resolve is one thing, but at the end of the day, and I guess, Julian, this question's for you, there's sort of the appearance of how you're doing, which is how you come across, your resolve, and then the actually, how are you doing? How are the Democrats doing when it comes to national security?
I don't think they've had a good few weeks. I mean, you have the policy and you have the politics. In terms of the policy, what President Obama spoke about in terms of reforms that might be needed in the post-9/11 system, I think there's a lot of agreement on that. Areas we didn't fix that the 9/11 Commission had pushed the country to deal with, like congressional oversight and centralizing the way Congress looks over at these policies. But then there is the politics, the kind of halting, slow response by the president and recent discussion of all the problems that went wrong don't play well politically for the president or for the Democratic Party.
You, Professor Zelizer, you have compared this national security problem, crisis, whatever you want to call it, to LBJ's Vietnam. Is that a fair comparison, do you think?
Well, the comparison is that when LBJ took over, Democrats had been attacked as being weak on defense, for having lost China to communism, for the stalemate in Korea, and that really shaped President Johnson's policies in 1963 and 1964. And I think Obama comes out of a period where Democrats faced similar criticism, and I do think it constrains the White House and sometimes causes them actually to be timid on reforms or taking certain steps that they fear will open them up to that attack.
Robert Zimmerman is about to break his neck, shaking his head no, no, no to every word you're saying.
All I'm saying, I agree with you that Democrats do think defensively on this issue, but the reality is Democrats have got to come out of group therapy and stop feeling defensive, especially this president in particular. You know, Teddy Roosevelt had the famous expression, speak softly and carry a big stick. Well, in fairness to Barack Obama, his administration has launched more drone missile attacks against al-Qaeda in 1 year than the Bush administration did during their entire tenure. And they've expanded the war against al-Qaeda. But perhaps speaking softly isn't the best approach. They've got to let that record be known.
First of all, we have to forget George Bush and the Republicans. You're beginning.
Did you forget Jimmy Carter during the Reagan years?
No, we didn't. We never talked about it. We never talked about it. We're beginning our 4th year with Democrats in charge of the Congress, including all the Homeland apparatus. We're beginning our 2nd year of the president. The bottom line here is Americans, we have a right to make sure that we spend billions of dollars making sure those things work. And the president yesterday said he's going to make it accountable. and I take him at his word. But the bottom line is today we have a system that needs to put this back front and center. We've had too many other things front and center. We're in a war on two fronts. We have terrorists all over the world who basically want to kill Americans.
You've got a healthcare debate, you've got an immigration debate, you've got people who are calling for education reform, because that's critical too. Is there just too much on the plate?
Well, there's a lot on the plate, but the bottom line is this has to get back front and center again, and not anybody be afraid of it. Not be afraid of basically going after these people and doing whatever it takes to keep them from killing us.
It was very shocking news, I got to tell you. Gentlemen, I appreciate your time this evening. As always, Julian Zelizer joining us from Princeton University, and of course our friends Ed Rollin and Robert Zimmerman. Nice to see you guys. Thanks.